And I just want to remind you that we are recording this meeting.
Thank you. All right, so hopefully everybody can hear me. Welcome. This is going to be a special forum to discuss the proposed zoning bylaw amendment to allow drive-through restaurants by special permit in Westford. Joining me this evening and assisting me on the panel are three members of the Economic Development Committee. They are Bruce Rosenberg, Tom Barry, and Ron Catarino. A couple notes before we start. There is a handout available. There is a current draft of the motion for town meeting that is in the handout section here in the webinar app. Tomorrow, there's going to be a number of things happening. We hope to have a document center information folder available up on the town website that you'll be able to locate by going to the planning board main page. We'll be posting a copy of this briefing there tomorrow. We also will be keeping an update there as we progress with the development of the motion. And I will remind everybody, this is kind of like making sausage. You're going to get to see the process as we go through the month of May of working through the public hearing process and making changes to the motion before it gets presented to town meeting on the 12th of June. Tonight is the first of two information forums. We're going to have a second one on the 26th at 7 p.m. And depending upon how we go tonight, we will adjust the presentation that night. If we receive questions tonight that we cannot answer, we'll make every effort between the four of us here and the town staff we're working with to get those answers for you. Also, I just want to note that we're going to be monitoring the attendees. And if you have a question, and if we can save it to the end of this presentation, that would be the easiest to handle. But please just raise your hand and we will address your questions. We also have some folks here who are trying to record these questions for me, and we're going to capture the questions and try to capture the answers so they can be entered in the public record of the public hearing that's going on right now for this particular warrant article, as well as the other zoning articles that are before the planning board. And because we are an open hearing, I am the only member who will be of the Westford Planning Board who will be speaking tonight. So to keep this clean and so that we are not seen as conferring amongst each other, it'll just be the two of us. Hopefully everybody can hear us out there. So if we can move to the second slide. Tonight, I'm going to give a quick background, a little bit of background on how we've gotten to where we are with this particular article, provide information on the master plan and the commercial industrial tax base information with respect to that master plan. Looking at the way ahead, I'm going to talk a little bit about the upcoming events with this bylaw, as well as a survey. And the survey has just gone online, and you'll get information on how to participate in that survey later. Also going to talk about the actual structure of this bylaw, and it's being presented as a drive-through restaurant overlay district bylaw. You're going to see throughout the presentation the acronym DTROD, and that is the acronym for drive-through restaurant overlay district. And lastly, take questions. Let's move on to the next slide. So how we got there. So following the October 2020 special town meeting, where there was an article that was defeated for drive-through restaurants, the Westford Economic Development Committee, kind of as routine, had been meeting with different commercial property owners in Westford. They were discussing occupancy rates, discussing the leasing issues as they normally do. And some of those property owners expressed interest in drive-through restaurants and expressed the challenges they were facing in attracting new restaurants to Westford. And in particular, some of the properties, and as a new trend, anchor stores are no longer seen as just a store like a Marshall's or a Macy's at the larger malls, but banks and restaurants are becoming the new anchors, in addition to food stores and groceries. So some of these property owners are challenged in this economic time of trying to establish a foothold with their property when they can't attract a restaurant that will bring in the traffic they need. So the Economic Development Committee at a meeting in February met with some property owners, and following that meeting, the EDC and the town manager came to the planning board and requested we consider placing a drive-through restaurant article on the annual town meeting warrant. In March, the select board did place a placeholder for that article, and the placeholder is very simple. It was using the language that was used last year, which is very, very broad for a warrant article. They asked us to run the process to develop a motion to investigate it. So since early March, I've been working with Tom, Bruce, and Ron here as we've been researching, we've been doing community outreach, talking to various committees and boards about what the issues are and what they would like to see in such a bylaw. At the 5th of April, the planning board agreed by vote to sponsor the zoning bylaw amendment on the warrant and to request that the select board place it on the warrant with that language. We had been discussing delaying the 2021 article until the fall town meeting, but because of Article 24, we felt that could pose a risk, and we didn't want to wait a year and a half necessarily based upon the findings of this process. So we decided to put it on at this time. Also in parallel, people may be aware that Acton is currently looking at some of the same issues, and they've been running a process since I think to the December timeframe. They've had some community outreach meetings, and they also have run a survey, and they are going to be discussing this at their town meeting 9 days after ours, and they have a similar article on their town meeting warrant. So we would have liked to have taken the same amount of time, but the situation just kind of dictated that we run it now. So we're running the two forms this month, and we're going to be running a survey starting tonight. And you're going to get the information here in a few slides on how to participate in that survey. Next slide, please. So kind of looking at this and kind of helping to frame this, kind of been talking with industry experts, we've been talking amongst ourselves, and kind of this is kind of a paradigm for, or structure of paradigms for how dining, ordering, and delivery can be accomplished today. And I think a lot of this has tremendously been advanced and grown and improved just because of COVID. So there's kind of 5 major types here, depending upon how you cut them and slice them. The first one, as we know, is just traditional dine-in services. And obviously with COVID, that's been, and with the impact to capacity, there's been a real challenge there for both the consumer, the diner, as well as the restaurateur, who has been faced with greatly reduced capacities, while at the same time incurring many of the same bills and leasing charges. So there's been a problem for both parties here of how to deal with dine-in. So we've seen a lot of adaptation here. There's certainly takeout at the takeout counter, but that also has been impacted because of people's fears and the reality that they did not want to go into closed spaces during the pandemic. So for takeout counter, there's traditionally counter, telephone, and online ordering that allows you to have that takeout order placed and picked up. Similarly, you could also do a telephone or online order and request curbside pickup or contactless delivery. And we've seen that offered in many of the restaurants in Westford here in different, in various creative ways. And it's worked fairly well. We also have seen a real uptick in home delivery that is executed through also placing a telephone or an online order. And that home delivery can be placed provided either by the restaurant or by a third-party delivery service. And lastly, what we're talking about now tonight is the ability to have a drive-through window. And in that case there, depending upon what is set up, we're all used to the long time model for drive-through where there's an outside ordering kiosk. But today there's also now telephone and online ordering possible at some restaurants with drive-through capability, in which you basically wait until your order's ready, you're notified, and you then proceed through a takeout line through a drive-through window and pick up your order. So I just want to lay that out, and that's what we've been looking at. And this has been the framework that I think Tom, Bruce, Ron, and myself have been analyzing as we've talked with various community experts as well as industry experts in the restaurant business in this area. Next slide, please. So going back to April 2009, that was when Westford's comprehensive master plan was last updated. And it asked a question, but it didn't really answer it. And the question it asked was, should the non-residential, which is the commercial and industrial tax base, be increased up to 20 or 25% range? And that was the range that was first recommended in the 1995 Westford master plan. As far as I know, this has not really been answered by an official committee. I believe it was referred to the implementation committee, but I have not been able to find that there's been an analysis done or a recommendation. But we're kind of still living with the 1995 recommendation of trying to strive for 20 to 25% of the tax base being realized through commercial and industrial tax revenues. If we can move on to the next slide. So where are we with respect to this? Well, today, as you can see here with the two middle categories of commercial and industrial, we're sitting just around 10% of our tax base in FY20 came, and the FY20, I should remind everybody, ended back on the 30th of June 2020. And so we've only really hit 10%, so we're not even close to that 20 to 25% goal. And so that's one of the I think the drivers that the EDC has been looking at as they've been talking to property owners, especially on the 110 corridor, and seeing what could be done, not just with restaurants, but commercial property in general, because there is a halo effect to some extent where if you attract people for one business reason down to that commercial strip, they will shop at other establishments as well. So they may come to dine, and then they may see that there's a paper store, or they may see Paul's Diner, for example, and they may come back to visit that just because they hadn't noticed it before. So there is an impact to the whole strip if we can get people to frequent it for more of their commercial shopping. Next slide, please. So what's the way ahead here before I jump into actually talking about the bylaw? As I said, we opened our public hearing on all of the zoning articles this past Monday, the 3rd of May. At the current time, all of those hearings are continued to the 17th of May. We are running these two online information forms tonight and again on the 26th. And the 26th will be will not just be a repeat of tonight, but we will adjust it based upon the questions and based upon what's asked of us tonight to be discussed at that meeting on the 26th. I also want to announce now that there is an online survey. You can see here the URL, as well as you can see there is a QR code for scanning. Let me remind you that this briefing should be available tomorrow on the town website. So if you don't get all the information here, please go there. Also, starting tomorrow, we will be advertising the survey up on the town webpage. So you'll be able to find the link for that. Just so you're not surprised, we are using a third-party service to implement that survey, and that's SurveyMonkey. So what will happen is you'll be, when you go to this URL at the town website, you'll get redirected to a survey service that's conducting this survey, or a survey tool rather, that is letting us conduct this. And again, I'll give you my thanks to Mike Wells from IT, who helped me set this up, and also give a big thanks to Paul Fassbender, who had assisted me earlier in the week in crafting and retailoring the questions for that survey. Next slide, please. So just to start discussing the bylaw, this is different than what was presented in the past, different than what was presented back in the fall. After doing the research, we have structured this as an overlay district. And so it's proposed as an amendment to Westford's zoning bylaw as a drive-through restaurant overlay district. I also now want to discuss how the zoning bylaw can be amended. I know there have been some questions on Facebook and some misinformation about this. So I think it's very important to remember that a zoning bylaw may only be amended at a town meeting, and it must be done with a 2/3 approval vote. It's not a simple majority, and it does not require any vote of affirmation through the ballot. I know there's been some confusion out there on the social media channels about this being just the first step of the approval process, and that's not correct. I think somebody may be confusing the zoning bylaw change process with the Prop 2.5 override process, which does require 2 votes. So just remember, it's at town meeting, that is where you get to vote, but it does require 2/3 majority approval. Next slide, please. So in the current version of the bylaw, and let me remind you that the motion for this bylaw is available tonight as a handout. If you look in your control panel for webinar, you should be able to download that motion. And hopefully you can all do that. We are defining the overlay district as all the properties in the commercial highway zoning district that have frontage along Littleton Road. So it is slightly reduced from all commercial highway districts. I will point out that, yeah, there is a few parcels along Littleton Road that extend off of Littleton Road. One example would be the tubing hill at Neshoba. So we are restricting that in the overlay district. So next slide. So I know not everyone is familiar with overlay districts. Not everybody is familiar with all the planning concepts here. So I just want to remind you, using a definition from the American Planning Association, that the overlay district, it's a zoning district, but it can be applied over one or more previously established zoning districts, or it can be applied over a portion of a zoning district, as we're doing here. And it can establish additional or stricter standards and criteria for the properties that are being discussed in that overlay district, in addition to those criteria that already exist for the underlying zoning district. So with respect to a restaurant with a drive-through, in most cases, it would have those restaurants would have to satisfy all of the existing criteria for a commercial highway property. And in addition, if they were looking at establishing a drive-through window, would have to establish the additional criteria that would be in this the bylaw in whatever form it gets passed, if it gets passed. So in terms of the zoning bylaw within Westford, overlay districts are first identified in section 211 of the zoning bylaw. And you will notice that if you download the motion that is here in the handout, you will notice that there is an amendment to that section to add the definition or to identify a drive-through restaurant overlay district. And then again in section 8 is where the special districts are defined in much more detail. And that's where the bulk of this bylaw, of the amendments, would take place if this bylaw were to be enacted. Next slide, please. So what we've done in this first this revision of the motion is talked about what are the special permit requirements here. So the issuance of a special permit by the planning board for a property, a drive-through restaurant overlay district restaurant, is for either a restaurant that is to construct a drive-through capability, or for add-on of a drive-through capability to an existing restaurant. The special permit can only be issued when this project goes through site plan approval, and it must be performed in adherence to section 9.4 of our zoning bylaws, and must also be subjected for review and satisfy all the requirements that are set forth elsewhere in this presentation that are listed in that motion I've been referring to. Next slide. And I'm going to give a quick overview here. This is not going to be, this is a summary of the requirements, but I'm not leaving anything out. I'm just summarizing it and providing it in simpler language tonight. First and foremost, in the current revision of this motion, we are proposing that no more than 6 special permits for restaurants with drive-through capability be issued within this drive-through restaurant overlay district. Following Monday night's public hearing, there was some discussion. And so I think we like to think of this as kind of analogous to what happens with liquor sales permits today. Right now, Westford has so many permits based upon the number of residents in town. And when Westford would like to go acquire an additional permit, which is the case coming up as well, there's another article for an additional liquor sales permit this year. That is done through a request and approval at town meeting and a home rule petition to the state. In the case of the drive-through restaurant overlay district, if we were to give out and utilize all 6 special permits for drive-through restaurants, and there was a request for additional ones, that would require coming back to town meeting and doing a zoning bylaw amendment again to review that request. So this right now is in the current revision of the motion, so no more than 6. Next slide, please. So what we've looked at is now establishing some of the standards for drive-through restaurants. And here's an overview of those standards. First and foremost, a restaurant with a drive-through is only eligible for consideration if it's located fully within the drive-through restaurant overlay district. And that means you could not take a parcel that might only satisfy some of the conditions, might only be large enough to do something, and you couldn't merge it with another parcel that was not in this overlay district. So you couldn't try to extend further back from a commercial highway or further left or right from a commercial highway parcel to create a parcel for such a restaurant. We are also right now requiring that the restaurant can only be located on an end cap of an existing commercial development, or it must be freestanding. And the reason for this is due to traffic and safety concerns. And at this time, we just don't have any parcels that would be located, let's say, as a non-end cap, as a middle parcel, in which we could see drive-through could be done safely, and it could be done without inconveniencing abutting businesses in that shopping center. We are also looking at requiring a minimum of 10 interior seats. I guess at this point I should mention that one of the towns we looked at was Chelmsford, and we learned a lot from what Chelmsford has done with the Route 129 special overlay district they have created for restaurants. And so we like the idea that this requirement would mean that you would not have a food kiosk that was only drive up and had no dining services on site. So we are looking at requiring both interior seats as well as some outdoor seating and eating areas. So we're really looking at rewarding, if you would, or encouraging restaurants to offer many different services and many different delivery and dining options, so that we could, I think, enhance and provide the services to Westford that Westford residents want. And lastly, we are looking to limit the drive-through hours strictly to 5:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. Another reason why I've provided this set of standards is to kind of act as what we call a straw man in engineering, and to allow people to look at this and see what standards they they like, what standards they want to enhance, or what standards they might want to reduce in severity or capacity. So this is kind of our first proposal and looking to get a good discussion in terms of what folks want in terms of drive-through restaurants and how the restaurant should be delivering service to customers. Next slide. So, looking at signage, I want to thank Dylan O'Connor who helped me with this. Dylan is on the planning board and is the vice chair. We've kind of looked, you can see here, we are looking at needing to amend these the sign bylaw within the zoning bylaws and to look at what has to be done for menu signage. And that is probably the one that we are looking at and controlling with the most controls, because we want to minimize the effect. We are, as you can see here, it must be appropriately screened and camouflaged. Looking at examples, you can see that the total menu board cannot exceed six feet, and we're looking at a maximum of 30 square feet, but we're also looking at it being effectively screened. As I say, this is kind of like making sausage this month, and we are still working on some issues. There are two issues that I'm working on and looking to other communities for guidance, and we are doing some research on this. And those are looking at dimensional standard requirements for the lane capacity, lane size, queuing lengths. One of the areas we've been talking about with residents, and we heard during the hearing, were concerns about air pollution related to long time idling. So we're looking at possibly putting in analytic standards that look at what would be the maximum average weight that would be permitted for a restaurant before you would have to go to some kind of a passive, kind of like a cell phone lot concept at the airport, where you would not proceed from the ordering kiosk directly to queue up for the drive-through window, but rather you would go and go to a parking spot. We would require that signs be placed in those parking spots that you must turn off your car while you wait. And so I think in the other evening, one of the participants, one of the speakers talked about, well, what if it was a fast casual restaurant offering more upscale food than hamburgers, and maybe they were making chicken marsala for delivery, for example. Obviously, that takes a lot longer time to prepare. So we'd be looking at delivery options and curbside waiting that would support the parking of cars while they did not idle. So we are doing everything we can to put standards in that encourage that. Obviously, we'd also have to be looking at site capacity when they propose, because that would increase the parking and the lane queue capacity that would be required to support such an ordering system. So these are still being worked. And the other issue that we're concerned about is how to deal with the kiosk speaker volume and to have effective baffling, as well as to look at what the impact is on abutters. Obviously, we're very concerned for a parcel that might be abutting a residential parcel or might be located very closely to another commercial parcel. So these are two things that we are looking at developing standards, and we will have those hopefully in the motion in time for the next discussion of this at the hearing of the planning board. I believe it's on the 17th of this month. Next slide. In addition, this is the language that is taken from similar bylaws in our, or similar sections in our bylaw that allow us to factor in an analysis of the site design, looking at traffic flow, public safety, look at the ability to protect significant environmental resources, as well as community character. And I guess the best examples I like to use for this are things like, look at what happened with the Chili's. When Chili's was constructed, there was a barn that was located on that parcel, which was called the Reed Barn. And that Reed Barn had a real nice old rural character. The barn was saved. It's now located down on the 4-H fairgrounds. And when the planning board worked with the developer for that parcel, one of the encouraging criteria was to kind of mimic that character and style of the barn when they designed the chilies there. So obviously we look at what the area is and try to adjust accordingly. The last important note here, and this is something we just worked in today after discussing with some folks, it's important to remember that the drive-through restaurant overlay district falls wholly within the Route 110 master plan area of coverage. And that was the first committee I worked on 25 years ago. And one of the products that came out of the Route 110 master plan were a set of design and architectural guidelines. And those design guidelines still apply today. And we still encourage all development that takes place along the 110 corridor to review those recommendations and do everything in their power to comply with those recommendations. And they make recommendations for how to kind of preserve some of the character elements we want along Route 110. Next slide. So in summary here, we've been doing some outreach for the last 2 to 3 months here, myself with Tom, Bruce, and Ron. And we have received, I think it's unanimous votes of approval from these 4 organizations so far. Obviously, the Westford Economic Development Committee, which these 3 gentlemen represent. The Westford Commission on Disability, we've met with them twice. The Westford Council of Aging, and the Westford Business Association. So we continue the outreach in the next month. In addition to the forums, I will be representing this and presenting this information with the League of Women Voters twice in the next month. And we'll probably be doing outreach with additional organizations, as well as continuing to work with community and industry subject matter experts in this area. And so the next slide, I think, is questions. So I'm going to open this up for questions. We can handle this several ways. If people want to raise their hands, we can recognize you and you can ask your question, or you can type the question in through the tool here. So I just got to note there's feedback. If somebody can. Valerie, is the feedback still happening? You're unmuted, if you can unmute yourself.
No, you sound great now.
Okay.
I think somebody muted a little way into your presentation and it was better.
Okay. It looks like I'm looking at one question. When will this go to the select board? It's my understanding we are going to the select board, I believe next week, because I've been working with town staff to get a version of this briefing and motion signed off, and that's going to be presented to the select board. That does not mean that the process stops there. We plan to refine, present the details of this up until town meeting, and try to factor in guidance from town residents and try to address all the concerns as best we can. Next question. I got one from Vicky. Vicky, Gary, you can unmute yourself now.
Yeah, I am unmuted, I think.
Yes, you are.
Okay, so I attended the planning board meeting on Monday. I am pleased to see some of the improvements you've made to this, but that still does not mitigate the concerns that I have as a resident of this town. And I'm going to address a couple of those. I think the emissions and pollution concern is really not fully addressed by some of the things you've said. We, at town meeting last fall, signed a zero emissions petition by 2050. And drive-throughs contribute a lot. And whether or not they're coming through a drive-through or they're coming through a drive-through and then parking, it increased traffic on 110. I would hate to see 110 turn into Daniel Webster Highway. Number two, and I said this the other night, and I felt a little dismissed. The existing businesses on the 110 corridor who would have, had they had the opportunity when they opened in Westford, created or gone into a structure where they could have had the ability to do a drive-through. These are businesses that have paid taxes in this town, that have contributed charitably in this town, and now you're going to allow other companies to come in and give those companies an unfair competitive advantage. And I think that is a little, like I said, it was dismissed the other night of competition, but you're changing the rules midstream for these existing businesses who have chosen Westford for one of their locations, and chosen, and I'm going to use Starbucks as an example, although there's many. I'm sure Starbucks, because I've been to other Starbucks who have drive-throughs, had they known they would have been able to do a drive-through, they might have not picked the location they did in the Westford Valley Mall. And finally, I understand the desire to build businesses in Westford and create and grow businesses so we can grow our tax rate. We have a lot of empty spaces in some of the buildings there on 110. They're not conducive to drive-throughs. I think the first priority should be to try to fill those spots. Drive-throughs are not a panacea, and they're not going to grow necessarily business in that. It is up to the developers that own those buildings to try to market those buildings. I actually work with a developer in advertising and marketing, and I can't, that are in vastly different locations, but they promote this to the consumer in order to grow traffic to the destination, to the retail center. This is a short-term solution to a long-term problem, and this is a solution that you are trying to rush through. Acton is taking time. It's taking thoughtful time. It's taking several months. The town of Westford voted against this back in the fall, and I feel like you're rushing to judgment just because of a potential passing of an article, as opposed to taking your time and doing this in a far more thoughtful way than it was being done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we've got a Bill Bilotta.
Hey, thank you. And thank you for the effort here. We moved in a year ago, my wife and I, and between running around, it's definitely for us an inconvenience if we want to dip in somewhere quickly while we're, toting our kids all over the place. And so that's why I'm in favor of it. But and off of kind of, it seems like this was already turned down in October. What are you going to do to, and I know you've gotten more information, but how are you going to sell this to the residents to get this to pass? Like, have you thought about that?
Well, again, okay, so first off, as I said, we are doing more community outreach. The structure of this motion is far different than it was in the fall. There's a lot more structure to it. It's very well defined in terms of what the parcels are, using an overlay district. And we have been thoughtfully putting a lot of effort into the definition and refinement of the standards that you heard me discuss here this evening, as well as what you can see in the draft motion that can be downloaded.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you, Bill. Okay, next up, I have a Chauncey Chu. I'm going to unmute you. Chauncey, you are unmuted.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schaefer and the EDC. Just want to point out, I think you folks have put some real meat on the skeleton of the draft resolution or amendment that you had put out there back in April. So it's I see it as a vast improvement because now I can see more of the details of this amendment. However, I'm still opposed, as you know. The question I have, though, is, Mr. Schaefer, I asked Monday there about which foods were going to be considered upscale, and now are you going to mention that you're going to include all foods? So we're going to include the fried chickens and the chicken cutlet stuff, besides whatever you define as upscale, fast casual. So it's going to be open to all foods. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I think after the hearing and after discussing this, it was too difficult to provide how do we encourage one but allow all? So unfortunately, at this time, because we don't have an area that's strictly a fast casual or fast casual or fast district. So it's all foods. As I say, we were trying to look at Chelmsford, but it was too difficult to try to split the district up into sub-districts to differentiate the styles of restaurants. Okay, so next up is Anita. If you can unmute yourself. Anita.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, this is Anita Tona-Kringwin, and I also attended the planning board meeting the other night. I don't know if I should, I'll just say this because this is just what I do, but I do serve on the town select board, the Commission on Disability, and the Cultural Council, but I'm just speaking obviously on behalf of myself. I was thinking through some of the talking points and people's concerns and questions during the planning board meeting, and something that I was thinking about that I didn't bring up the other night was actually just sort of the business premise of, so I have family members who have restaurants, and I grew up working on a gas station at a convenience store. And although that's not the same as a fast food or drive-through restaurant or anything like that, there's this similar underlying business premise that you want as many transactions as possible, right? The more customers you have, the more transactions you have, the better your business is doing. And I think that we have this really big fear of cars idling, cars waiting, but that's actually not for the benefit of that business to have cars idling and cars waiting, because customers don't go to a drive-through restaurant looking to sit and wait. They're looking for fast in and out, whatever it is that they're buying, and I think that when we think about each transaction coming in, that's local revenue for the town, that's a business is going to try and be more streamlined, they want to be efficient. So I just wanted to put that out there as well in the conversation. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Anita. So next, Carol Morris, you are unmuted. If you can unmute yourself. Carol, if you can unmute yourself.
Bob, there's actually a written question from Carol. I don't know if that's what you wanted to.
Oh, okay. So we started with the way we got, the question is 6 drive-throughs seems like a lot for that stretch of Littleton Road. How did you arrive at that number? We arrived at 6 because that is, I think, the number we have for liquor stores in the town. And so that seemed like a good starting point. Again, this is open for discussion. It's open for amendment. And when you say that stretch, Littleton Road, I think the total length here is on the order of what, 2.5 miles. I'd have to actually measure it, but there's actually a significant number of commercial properties that are in this drive-through restaurant overlay district. I don't know if you want to speak on your own. Are there any more questions? I don't see any hands raised.
There's a new written one just came in.
Oh. That's a very good question. I got a question from Valerie Young. If I have a map of the described area handy that you could display. I don't know, Mike, do you have the zoning bylaw map, or should I try to find that?
No, I don't actually keep it on my desktop, Bob. I'm sorry.
No problem. Let me look to locate it. I do have it here, but I have to find it. I do keep it on my desktop. So let me work to see if I can display this. This will be a first for me.
Okay, so I've made you the presenter, so you should better choose to share that window now.
Yep, I'm gonna. If I can find it, I didn't find it. Right.
Bob?
Yep.
While you're looking for that, could I make a couple of comments?
Yes, please do, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Barry from the Economic Development Committee. It's interesting, over the last month or so, Bruce, Ron, and myself have done a lot of outreach, not just to the organizations in town, but various experts in drive-through restaurants. Again, as Bob mentioned, we had talked to Chelmsford, Acton, Littleton, Tingsboro, but we did another interview with a fellow by the name of Bob Luz, L-U-Z, who is the president and CEO of the Massachusetts Restaurant Association. He has been involved with the restaurant industry all his life. He made a couple of good comments. I'm just going to tell you what a few of these were and take them for what they're worth. He mentioned that sales rise, and I'm talking from a business standpoint now. I realize this doesn't address fumes and litter and so forth, but sales rise and restaurants put in a drive-through restaurant. He believes that is due to the convenience and the safety factor, especially now where people are demanding contactless food delivery. He mentioned a couple of very interesting statistics, and you might take this for what it's worth. Pre-COVID, the takeout business was 8 to 10% on average of restaurants' businesses. Pre-COVID, delivery was essentially non-existent, and 90 to 92% of their business was inside the restaurants, sit down, ordering. Current and from COVID and beyond, he mentioned that last summer into the fall, dining habits changed. Takeout, where it was 8 to 10%, now became 25%. Now this is takeout, it's drive-through, it's everything. He's talking Massachusetts in general, and as a matter of fact, national statistics also. So summer into fall, takeout increased to 25%, outdoor seating increased to 40 to 45%, and indoors seating reduced to 35%. Winter came along and takeout and delivery became 40 to 50%. Just some restaurants, he mentioned, are fighting for their lives. And they just believe that they have to do some of these things like drive-throughs to survive. He did mention one other fact, I don't know if I'll find, yeah, here it is right here, that Massachusetts on March 1st of 2020 had 16,000 restaurants. March 1st of 20, 16,000 restaurants. In June of 20, which is what, 3 months later, 3,400 had failed, 35%, I'm sorry, 23% had failed. Now, maybe there were too many restaurants to begin with, but a lot of them failed. He talked about, and I know that Bob mentioned it, the halo effect of cars looking for a drive-through to place an order. If they've got kids in the car or the disabled or the elderly, they come off the highway and they see, maybe they've never been off that exit before. They see the CVS's and the market baskets and the Paul's Diner and those kind of things. He was saying that 1 to 1.5 miles off the exit benefits from those people seeing signage on the highway and coming off the exit and traveling through town. That obviously is an increase in revenue to the town of Westford, as well as to the business themselves. The one thing that he's very concerned with on a state and national basis is what he calls the death of retail. Many of these businesses are being, and he used the term, interneted out. So somebody mentioned, I forget who it was, that we have a lot of empty stores on 110. Economic Development Committee has been working with developers in town to try and help with that problem. But Mr. Luz hit it right on that you can't internet out restaurants, but they are very concerned with the retail industry. Just a few statistics while Bob was looking for his information.
Thank you very much, Tom. So hopefully you can all hear me again. So two things I've done during my little break here. I've been able to bring up the zoning map for Westford. And also the total length along this corridor is approximately 4 miles. I measured it between the two businesses that are at each end of this zoning map. You can see here, I'm colorblind, so I'm assuming this is blue. All of the blue parcels are the commercial highway districts in Westford, and you can see them extending down the length. You can also see some of the parcels that I discussed that are on the Neshoba tubing area at Neshoba Valley. There are also some parcels that are not a commercial highway in that corridor. However, the vast majority of the property along 110 is commercial highway. I'm going to scroll up slightly here and show you that there's also there's another parcel right up in the very northeast corner of Westford on Makepeace Road. There is another commercial highway parcel up there, and that is not included in this drive-through restaurant overlay district.
So, Bob, when you get a chance, can I say a few words as well?
Yes, please go, Bruce.
Okay, Bruce Rosenberg. I chair the Economic Development Committee. First, Bob, this was a extremely detailed. I applaud you. A thesis, a dissertation level. So let me first start by saying all of our efforts really are directed, and I want to thank all the participants. The questions from Vicky, Bill, Chauncey, Anita, Carol. You are our stakeholders. Let me make this very clear. The residents, the community of Westford are our stakeholders here. We thank you for all your questions. There are a lot of very meaningful questions, some of which still remain for us to research. The issues, for example, of pollution and emissions has been one that has been on our mind for a while, and what we continuously hear as we question some of the experts, question people who are our counterparts in other towns, is that as technology advances with our automobiles, and we all know this is not the 1960s or 70s, our automobiles are that much more efficient. And yes, idling does contribute something, but this is, again, a vastly different situation. I don't know how to address the issues of unfair competition to restaurants. That's something we're going to have to think about. As Bob said, Tom said, this committee is committed to looking at filling those empty spaces. We, as the EDC, have over the last couple of months been bringing in the property managers and developers from Westford Valley Marketplace, Orchard Square, the tech parks, and it is most certainly a priority for us to fill those empty spaces. I don't know how to address issues as to the quality of food that might come into some of these restaurants. That's kind of an unknown, and frankly, I don't think it's a government regulatory issue as to what it is. People make their own decisions. I'm not necessarily going to tell you that I'm going to frequent a hamburger place, but it is a legitimate issue. I mean, I have two daughters. I would probably sell one to get a legal seafood here, but whatever happens, happens. So again, my basic comment is we are looking at this in detail. You, the residents, are our stakeholders. And as Bob said, there's a survey, and we are going to pay great diligence and attention to what you're doing. I thank you all. That's probably my get off the stage comment.
So also, let me add a couple other comments. I know there was the question earlier about, 6 permits being a lot. One, let me emphasize that this is a 4-mile stretch of road. So I don't think that's a high density of clustering of these businesses. But more importantly, I don't envision the planning board issuing all 6 at once. That's not going to happen. If you've paid attention to what the planning board does with any development, be it commercial or residential, it's a fairly involved, very thoughtful deliberation. And especially with respect to this, I think we want to earn and maintain the trust of Westford. So we will be looking very closely, especially at the first few of these, as we find out what the issues are and we determine what it is we're going to be asking of the applicants and what we're going to ask for proof that they are doing everything possible to not have a negative impact on the abutters and on Westford as a whole. I also want to address just that character is very tough for us, and so we will be, working very closely with the design guidelines and applying those. One other point too I should make. I thought about this while Bruce was speaking. The issue of car idling is something we don't just have with a drive-through window. We currently are having that issue right now with all of the curbside pickup, be it contactless or through the window. We have a large number of cars that are idling at all of our restaurants at this time. So it's not like with dine-in where they drive up, turn the car off, and go in. Anytime we have cars waiting out there for delivery, there's a high percentage of them that are idling, especially during the winter months. So.
I guess another comment, Bob, that I want to emphasize, again, as the residents of Westford are our constituency, our stakeholders, what we're trying to do here is to really provide as additional options to the ones that already exist. None of them are mutually exclusive, and they all have their positives and their negatives, but just another option that addresses some of the obstacles for some of the sectors of our population. So each and every one of the items that Bob had mentioned, curbside pickup, home delivery, they all come with very positives, but also some downsides, whether it's cost or anything else. So this is just meant to be really another option to address the convenience, the accessibility, and the needs of our populace.
So at this point in time, I still have 3 people with hands up, but I believe those are hands that were put up because I previously recognized all 3 of them. If somebody does want to speak, if you could just flash that hand, I will recognize you. So, okay, Bill Bilotta would like to speak. Bill, you are now unmuted.
Hey, sorry, thanks. So you had talked at that potential businesses see the value in the drive-through and need to drive-through, have any of the existing businesses in the community or along that stretch come to you and said, we really need the drive-through?
I wouldn't say it's a really need that we've gotten, but we've gotten strong desires from several, I think 2 or 3 businesses on that stretch. I don't want to name them tonight. One of them is kind of a surprise. Looking at it, I didn't think that, but in some cases there are businesses that are small business, but they have several locations, and they have told us why they want this is because the locations where they have drive-throughs perform much better. So we do have that. We also get landlords telling us of the situation regarding this because they are trying to attract tenants, and they struggle to do so because they have a high percentage that come in talking about a restaurant and leave because they can't put a drive-through in. So.
Okay, so there are some existing that we could enhance by giving drive-through. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Anybody? Okay, I have Valerie and Vicky, so I'll recognize Valerie first. Let me unmute you. Valerie, please go.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Great. My name is Valerie Young. I also serve on the school committee, but I'm here speaking as a resident and parent. And having young kids and getting them in and out of the car, I really appreciate this effort. But also for me, seeing the Council on Disability and the Council on Aging, Commission on Disability and the Council on Aging support this really speaks volumes to me as well. And I just really appreciate the details and the restrictions that were explained tonight. I think people hear drive-through and imagine a free-for-all or Route 9 in Natick, and so sharing and understanding those checks and balances that are in place, I think is really helpful. And I also just wanted to tie this conversation into something that Anita mentioned, which is the revenue that the town would see from these transactions. And just the benefit of having thriving businesses rather than vacant buildings. I'm sure if anyone's followed kind of the school budget process, it's gotten tighter and tighter year over year, and families are just continuing to expect the same level of service. The cuts are harder. The discussions are really tough. And a conversation that I've seen play out is people trying to realize what can we start to do proactively as a town to make these decisions and these budget scenarios better. And so this to me is a very proactive solution that is getting towards that goal. So this seems like a very promising way to do that, and I really support it. Thank you for all the work.
Thank you. And Valerie, your comments reminded me, I'm not sure I was clear in my introduction, and this will be an improvement for the 26th. Currently, in the commercial highway district, Westford zoning permits all businesses, with the exception of restaurants, to have drive-throughs. So we don't have a lot of drive-throughs. We had a drive-through pharmacy, I know, that disappeared. But if somebody wanted to come in and have a drive-through small grocer or convenience store, that is permitted under our zoning today. It is strictly restaurants that are not permitted to have a drive-through window. Let me recognize Vicky. I think you're unmuted, Vicky, so please proceed.
Hi, I actually wanted to address a couple of the comments from Tom and Bruce very quickly, because I agree with you that restaurants are struggling to recover from COVID, and that is part of what I had said earlier with creating an unfair competitive advantage to the existing restaurants. You know, I'm thinking Starbucks, I'm thinking Dunks. They also have curbside service. You know, they're perfectly willing to do that. Those places and some of the other restaurants in town are still struggling to recover from COVID. It may seem on the surface that they have, but there's a long way to go. And that's what one of my concerns is with this drive-through push, that you're going to create a situation that's going to be even harder for them to recover from COVID. The other thing I'd like to address and sort of offer offline to the Economic Development Committee, as I referenced earlier, I actually am in marketing and advertising, and I've seen a lot of data in the course of my work on consumer behavior. So you're absolutely right that it's post-COVID, very difficult for businesses to recover. We're getting into an era where a lot of consumers are doing the online shopping. And as I said, in the course of my work, I've run across this a lot. The drive-thrus is just, like I said before, it's a short-term solution to a longer-term problem. And I think in your work with these developers, there are other routes, there are other things they need to consider besides this short-term solution. Getting 6, and I agree that 6 sounds like a lot, but in some respects it's not. And that's going to like magically turn things around. No, there are other things you guys need to look at in doing that. And like I said, I'm perfectly happy to have an offline conversation about other things developers should be considering when trying to promote their properties and grow that. I won't get into it here because nobody wants to hear it. So like I said, I'm happy to do that, but I really, really think that this process is being rushed. You've done some significant work between Monday and today, but it has a long, long way to go. And town meeting is around the corner, and I just don't think that this process, there's a lot of concerns that still have to be addressed, and I just don't think there's enough time to do that. Thank you.
So Vicki, if you would, my town email address was shared for the announcement of this meeting. Drop me an email with your email address. I will make sure that gets to Tom, Ron, and Bruce, and we will reach out to and contact you in the next few days.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I don't see any more hands raised. So I think that concludes tonight. So let me remind you of a few things here. One, we are going to run another information session on the 26th of this month, beginning at 7 p.m. And I will hope to get the announcement for that meeting up next week so that there's plenty of time for people to advertise it and to come out and participate. Also, we will be posting the contents of tonight's briefing in the next day or so up on the town website. So please look towards the planning board page to find the location of that. That will also include a copy of the latest revision of the motion. And as we proceed forward, that motion will probably continue to evolve and be updated on that site. I will also make sure that we put a copy of the zoning map up there. I think it was Valerie that asked that. That was a good question. So I'll make sure we share that in that location so it can be found easily. With that, thank you. And the next meeting we hope to see you at will be the 17th of May at the Planning Board continued hearing for the zoning articles. Thank you.